Do your shoulders look something like this? Or maybe you find that you get scapular winging through certain ranges of motion. Well, chances are that if you've looked into shoulder rehab exercises, you've probably come across the cue to depress and retract your shoulder blades. Although this is well intended to provide a sense of shoulder stability, it doesn't go nearly deep enough to the complex nature that makes up our shoulder girdle and how that interacts with our neck and our ribcage position. Throughout the course of this video, you will be taken step by step on how to improve your shoulder function and mobility. You'll learn all about the integral relationship between how our ribcage, shoulder girdle, and head all need to work as a cohesive unit if we truly want to restore shoulder function. So without further ado, let's get into it. So before we jump into today's exercises, I first wanted to talk about some of the reasons as to why always depressing and retracting your shoulder blades may not always be the right thing. Now, there certainly is a pandemic of people having rounded shoulders and poor posture, but shoulder blade retractions necessarily aren't going to be your way out of it. Now, let me explain that with a rounded shoulder position. So if I tend to be more rounded through my shoulders, more rounded through my T-spine, and I kind of bias this more kyphotic position, we can see that if I retract my shoulder blades, but I keep everything else the same, it's actually just going to be pushing my head more forward. And the reason for that is because we're not addressing the underlying mechanism that influences our shoulder blade and our shoulder position, which is our rib cage. You see, if I come back to that same position and my shoulders are rounded, but now I just change the position of where my ribs are relative to my shoulders, they're already gonna be in a better position. So first and foremost, we're gonna wanna think about where our rib cage is relative to our shoulders, and then how can we influence the shoulder blade positioning relative to the rib cage. So we're gonna be doing that in a host of different ways throughout the course of this video, both with corrective exercises and different breathing protocols, so you can learn to be in a more expanded and upright position. So for this first exercise, you're gonna wanna grab yourself a yoga block, a book, a water bottle would also do the trick here as well. And what we're gonna be focusing on is creating some anterior expansion through the rib cage. Because as I was talking about before, because a lot of people tend to bias more of this slouch position or have their shoulders rounded, an area that they typically, this might be the case for you, can't create good expansion in is in through these anterior ribs. So what you're gonna wanna do is grab the tool of your choice. You're gonna take it behind you like so. And what we are gonna be focusing on here initially is actually allowing yourself to kind of come forward into this more slouched position. So I'm gonna be taking the block up. I'm gonna allow my elbows to initially be a little bit wide, and I'm allowing myself to collapse. Now, what the intention is gonna be as we go through this is we're gonna be trying to draw the elbows slightly towards one another at the same time that we're creating some expansion in through these anterior ribs. So I'll give you a side view. I'm holding the block up. This is gonna be wanting to pull me down. So I'm already gonna have to fight that with a little bit of extension. Then I'm gonna gently begin to draw the elbows towards one another. And you're gonna begin to cycle some inhales coming into these upper pec fibers. And you're also gonna be trying to notice with the breath, can you create height vertically? So can I get a little bit taller? And can I also get a little bit wider? You should almost feel as if the shoulders and the shoulder girdle itself is broadening. And what we're gonna be trying to emphasize as we go through this isn't retracting the shoulder blades as hard as we can, but allowing this anterior pressure to feed some thoracic extension, which is gonna allow the shoulder blades to come together as a result of it. So I'm not forcing the shoulder blades back, but I'm extending the spine almost through the shoulder blades, which is a little bit of a different intention. We can still get the same feedback in through the rhomboids and around the erectors, but we're also starting to build the capacity for how we breathe and maintain pressure to support this upright position. I would suggest working through this for anywhere between 30 to about 45 seconds. Think about 3 to 5 second inhales and 3 to 5 second exhales. So on our first exercise, we were working on some of this anterior expansion. On this next one, we're gonna work on some posterior expansion. So what we're gonna initially do is come into a quad pad position. So I'm just gonna be coming on all fours, and I want you to sense 6 different points, which may sound like a lot, but it's not so bad. You're gonna be focusing on your palms and having equal weight on either side, your knees having equal weight on either side, and your toes. And all I want you to kind of feel into to start with is those points of contact alongside a reach away from the hands via the shoulders. So I'm not gonna be locking my elbows out and trying to move away specifically by extending the elbows, but more by reaching away through my shoulder blades. And this is gonna start to feed a function of the shoulder blades called scapular protraction. And what we're gonna be attempting to do here is protract the shoulders without slouching or going into that rounded position. So I'm keeping my sternum more or less upright. I'm gonna start with that reach, and this is gonna allow the scapula themselves to get flush on the ribs. And we're probably gonna get a little bit of sensation in through the pecs. We're also gonna be looking through the serratus on each side, and just kind of feel and breathe into that for about 20 to 25 seconds to start with. And then what we're gonna do is lift our knees off the floor. So I'm gonna get some more feedback and weight into my toes. I'm then gonna lift my knees, and we're just gonna hold this position here. I'm gonna think about inhales coming posteriorly into the backside of my ribs. So we're gonna be looking for some expansion in through this area of your back. And then we're gonna do a gentle exhale over about a 4 to 5 second period on the front side of your body without collapsing. So I'm trying to keep some of that height. I'm not allowing my lumbar to be in excess of extension. My hips also aren't way up here. We're trying to almost think we're like a table in this position. And we're just gonna be holding that reach for anywhere between about 30 to 45 seconds, managing the same sort of breath cycle with about a 3 to 5 second inhale and exhale ratio. So for the third and final exercise as to why you should rethink shoulder blade retraction, and in general, just how to improve your shoulder blade and shoulder girdle function, we're gonna be working through a pendulum swing. So for this exercise, we're gonna be combining both our first and second exercise into one rhythmic motion. So what we're gonna start with is kind of this double bicep curl position to begin. And I want you to notice where my shoulders and really my ribs and head are around that. So my shoulders are slightly forward and my elbows are long. I don't have my head way forward. I'm not collapsed here or overextended. We're just trying to find some level of neutral to begin with. And then what we're gonna be swinging through is kind of this pendulum motion where we're gonna throw out. These are gonna come behind me, and that's where you're gonna start to find some extension, where then the momentum is gonna be taking you back into the curl. So what I would suggest is just get used to this position to begin with, kind of breathing around that. You can bring these down, you can let them come behind. You can see I'm even taking my weight forward a little bit, which is all good. And just kind of working a slight rhythm kind of between those two positions. Don't force it to begin with. Just kind of get familiar with what it feels like to flow between those two. And then we can start to just pick up the momentum just a little bit more. You can even come into the hips a little bit. But the intention here is that we're keeping integrity through the shoulder girdle. We're not allowing ourselves to just collapse here. We're trying to stay tall and keep everything that we were just working on in our previous two exercises linked to this more rhythmic movement. What I would suggest here is working through this for anywhere between about 12 to 14 reps, focusing on keeping the height in the upper body, maintaining a nice fluid rhythm as you go through. And by the end of that, you should find that your shoulders, both on the front and the back side, have some sensation and circulation, and in general, just feel more mobile. So as you have come to learn throughout the course of this video, shoulder blade retraction is certainly an important function, but we want to make sure that that is happening alongside where our rib cage, where our hips, where our head, even where our arms are in space. It's important to maintain some level of integrity and connectivity between these different systems, as no part of the body works solely on its own. If you want to learn more about the integrative nature that makes up our body and how that applies to movement, then you can go watch another video I did on the body in some way right